Fragrance, the first in a series of articles chronicling God's pursuit of a young man impervious to the teaching of elders. The curriculum of grace was not the official curriculum of Groton, where I first encountered it at age 13. Groton is a Christian school. In chapel we sang A Mighty Fortress and listened to sermons about faith and social justice. In Sacred Studies class we read about Paul's journeys and Martin Luther's 95 Theses. In the fall, new boys attended confirmation classes to prepare for membership in the Episcopal Church. What I call the curriculum of grace was something different. It was a change that took place inside of me. It was a series of episodes orchestrated by God to teach what men could not. The first of these episodes took place on a sunny spring morning immediately after the chapel service at which I was confirmed as a member of the Episcopal Church. I had not intended to be confirmed. In fact, I had not even wanted to attend the confirmation class. My parents weren't believers. They chose Groton for me, not because they were looking for a Christian school, but because it was supposed to be the best school around. But when I mentioned on the phone that I declined to join the confirmation class, my father urged me to reconsider. Just give it a try. See what it's all about. It can't hurt you. If you hear what they have to say and don't believe, you don't have to go through with it. I did as my father asked. At 13, I didn't dare argue with him. Once a week, I joined the other new boys gathered in Dr. Crocker's comfortable, book-lined study and listened to his discourse on the gospel. He was a kindly man, a good and faithful teacher, but nothing in his patient explanations of sin, salvation, and Christ made a dent in the hard shell of skepticism I had inherited from my parents. When the time came to schedule the bishop's visit, I lingered after the meeting and explained that I had doubts. Dr. Crocker nodded absently, clearly not all that concerned. I couldn't even tell for sure if he had heard me. I suspected that if I'd pressed him, he would have shrugged and said something like, "Doubts are normal." When I told my father there was no such breezy dismissal, the mere mention of that critical word doubts was enough for him to cancel a ski trip that weekend, drive out to Groton, and take me out to a restaurant for an exceedingly uncomfortable lunch. "You don't know for sure it isn't true." He knit his brows and fixed me with that intense accusing stare I knew so well from my grade school years. Reluctantly I agreed that not believing what the evangelists wrote wasn't the same as knowing for sure that none of it was true. "Well, if it's not, and you go through with the confirmation, it's not going to hurt, is it?" Would it? My first thought had been that it would be dishonest, but now as I reflected on the difference between not believing something and knowing it to be false, I wasn't sure. "You're making friends here," my father said more gently. "I shouldn't think you'd want to be the odd man out." "How would it look if you backed out now? These boys will be lawyers, bankers, some of them will be in government. They'll be important to you." Friends? I wasn't sure I had friends. I wasn't exactly one of the in crowd. I was a brain. I aced papers and tests. I indulged in witty repartee of the classroom. Sometimes other boys laughed. I was tolerated. But friends? I wished I had an answer ready for my father, but I didn't. And so, in May, when the bishop came, I stood up alongside my classmates and recited the Apostles' Creed. It was a strange and unsettling experience. I longed for the words to be true, but in my heart I knew that longing for something doesn't make it so. After the service, the other boys went out to lunch with their parents who had driven out from Boston or up from New York to be with them on this great day in their lives. I didn't mind that mine hadn't. It was easier to be alone with my hypocrisy. There was still a half hour to be filled before lunch, so I walked alone along the pathway that led past the gym and the dining hall and the dorm. Beyond the headmaster's house, scene of my resistance and ignominious surrender, stood a grove of apple trees. The spring sun shone brightly. The trees were loaded with blossoms. The self-consciousness I had felt reciting the Apostles' Creed slipped mysteriously away. As I strolled through the grove with the sun on my back and the delicious perfume in my nostrils, I slipped into a fog of pleasure that felt almost like love. It didn't occur to me then, nor for many years later, that what I felt that spring morning might actually have been love. Still less did I wonder where it came from, or who was its source. I didn't connect the sensation with my longing to believe what Dr. Crocker had tried so hard week after week to impress on us. If you had said to me then that I felt love that day because I was loved, not just by my parents, but by him who entrusted me to my parents to raise, I would have been so shocked I probably would have walked into one of those gnarly old apple trees and given myself a concussion. That was my introduction to the curriculum of grace, a first installment, spending a few minutes in a kind of otherworldly trance, full of pleasure and longing, cocooned in what I thought was the fragrance of apple blossoms, not realizing it was the fragrance of the nearness of God. Then the bells rang in the chapel tower. The lunch hour was as predictable as Dr. Crocker's watch. My stomach was growling. The brief interlude of grace was over. I rushed off to the dining hall and forgot all about that fragrant apple grove and my conscience and the hands of the bishop on my pagan forehead. At 13, the thing I feared most at Groton, besides being shunned by peers for being a brain and a know-it-all, was missing a meal.